Welcome to Cojones Icons, the program that looks at people who have extraordinary courage, audacity and boldness, and how they've used it to achieve incredible things. Now today, a very special guest is someone who's used his cojones in the name of honesty and integrity, qualities that are rare in today's day and age. Now, to coin a phrase, it's not about the bike, it's about the man who was knocked off the bike. Or actually the man, well, as you can see, I've been knocked off the bike, but about the man who did the knocking off the bike for the right reasons. He is the chief sports writer of the Sunday Times. He's a journalistic legend and the man who exposed probably the biggest fraud in sporting history. He is the one and only David Walsh. David, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for agreeing to be on here. You are an absolute legend. Like I said, you've just kindly signed 2 of your books for me. Yes, I'm that much of a fan. I've already bought 2 books. Actually, I've got 3 because I've got one on my Kindle. But I wanted to ask you, this is very much about how people can learn from your tremendous guts, courage, audacity. What I wanted to ask you, first of all, is do you consider yourself a man with enormous courage, boldness, tenacity?
No, I don't. I've never seen it like that, and I would never see it like that. I don't think I'm particularly courageous. I don't think I mean, maybe a bit persistent. I would kind of answer.
Just a bit?
A little bit, yeah. I would answer to that accusation. But in relation to what I did, I was doing my job. And you might say, but oh, lots of other journalists weren't doing it, or only some were, and the majority weren't. But, you know, that's for other people to answer. My feeling at the time was, it was the logical thing to do. Any decent, proper journalist would have gone after this story because it was A, a great story, and B, the truth is important. If we're going to applaud people, we have to know who we're applauding and whether they're deserving of that applause.
Indeed. I mean, 13 years you pursued this story. That must have taken up a lot of your emotional energy, day and night. Would you say that it kind of affected other parts of your life?
Yeah, of course it did. I mean, would I have operated as well in other journalistic areas at that time? Probably not brilliantly, but I did keep everything else going. It wasn't like Armstrong was the only story I was doing. It was like lots of things were happening in the foreground, but his story was always floating in the background. And I was always trying to get some new lead or, well, but people might say, yeah, see, you were persistent. But I had, you know, sources, people who had given me fantastic information, and I had a responsibility to them. And if I wasn't, I'm thinking of people like Emma O'Reilly and Betsy Andreu and Greg and Cathy Lamond and Stephen Swart, people who were brilliant to me. Now, they weren't paid. It wasn't their job. Their heads were on the chopping block. They were getting the pushback from Armstrong and his people. And in Greg Lamond's case, suffered, in a business sense, terrible loss. But they did it for the same reasons that I did it. They wanted the truth out there. But the difference was I was being paid a monthly salary by the Sunday Times to do this job. They weren't. So if you give me some credit, you've got to give them far more. And it should be said in relation to Betsy Andreu, she was like the most fantastic sports editor. She was like, she had heard Lance admit to his doping before Lance ever won the Tour de France. So she knew, and she wanted the world to know because she thought it was important to get the truth out there. And she was like my sports editor from hell. She wouldn't have let a week, a day go past without challenging me on, what have you done? You know, what have you found out? Have you talked to this guy? Have you talked to that guy? And she became a tremendous friend, but she was a very hard taskmaster, and I don't know how far I would have got without people like her.
Did she give you the confidence that you could do it, or was that inside you always?
Yeah, I don't think I needed much confidence, because at the very beginning, in '99, when Lance won his first tour, people said you were going on an instinct, a gut instinct that he was a cheat. And my reply from a very early days, this is not gut instinct, this is gut conviction. So if you have a conviction that you're right, you don't need the confidence to pursue it. You just need the energy. And I certainly had the energy because it was a great story. And I had these tremendous sources who came on board, people who were, as I said, put their kind of lives, you know, into a difficult place, because when Lance Armstrong publicly criticizes you, that criticism reverberates around the world, and people have a low opinion of you because they think you have damaged a man they regard as an iconic figure. And it's not a brilliant place to be if you're Joe Citizen here. For David Walsh, I was getting that, of course, from Lance as well, but I could say, because it was my job, I was being paid to do this. So I don't feel that kind of any kind of legendary status for anything like that for what I've done. I just regarded it as a great story that I wanted to see through for as long as I could. If I was able to add something to that story, I would. I mean, when Lance sued us in 2004, and the case was resolved in 2006, our leeway at the Sunday Times for writing about this was greatly diminished, because we had a court judgment against us. We'd lost £1 million. Sunday Times weren't fussed about losing another 5 million on top of that. So we were a bit handcuffed. Now, it didn't stop me, because I wanted to get, you know, LA Confidential, a book I'd written in French. I wanted to get it out there, so I worked on that, and I got an updated, remodeled version of that book called From Lance to Landis, the inside story of American doping at the Tour de France. I got that out in the US, and that was a big benchmark for me. That was published in 2007, when the Sunday Times were handcuffed, as I say, and I felt I was still doing something to get the story closer to resolution.
And did you ever, at any point, doubt yourself going through it? Did you doubt yourself? Did you doubt your argument?
Never doubted the argument, honestly. I mean, from the very first tour Lance won, it was a gut conviction. I mean, it was just, if I went through the evidence with you now, I said, look, this is what we knew in '99. Your question to me would be, how did anybody believe this was true? People so wanted it to be true. The guy who came back from cancer, who was an inspiration to everybody, they so wanted it to be true that they just closed out the logic that said it can't be true. They just didn't want to hear it. I mean, I was a bit of a zealot, to be fair. You know, I was the kind of guy, if I were in a line or in a queue for an X-ray machine at an airport, and I saw this guy maybe, and I saw a number of these guys, and I approached all of them. You know, guy in a dark suit, briefcase, businessman, he's waiting to go through the X-ray kind of check, and I see he's got a yellow wristband on his wrist, and I say to the guy in front of me, excuse me, I've just seen a friend of mine up there, would you mind if I just went up and somebody lets me through? And I go up to the guy, complete stranger, and I say, I'm sorry for kind of interrupting or talking to you with a cold in this way, but you know that Live Strong bracelet you're wearing? I mean, that represents Lance Armstrong. And I said, I've done a lot of work on this story. The guy is a complete fraud and you shouldn't be supporting him. And the guy would look at me as if I was an alien, you know, somebody who had dropped from Mars into the queue, and would just kind of brush me aside with a look, and of course not take off his yellow wristband, because people had a belief in Lance that wasn't up for debate.
There must have been something in you that was demotivating, deflating. Perhaps your family telling you to give up the ghost, work colleagues, etc. Was there any kind of negative self-talk in your mind that was going to prevent you from going all the way?
No, never. It was actually the opposite. I remember being in Beijing at the Olympics, covering the Olympics for the Sunday Times, 2008, and you're just standing in the press room, and nobody knows you from Adam, because it's a very international place, journalists from all over the world, and there would be, you know, on any day there'd be 2 or 3 journalists who would come over, and I wouldn't have known who they were, what country they were from, and they would say, you're David Walsh from the Sunday Times, and I say, I am, and they say, I've really admired the way you've pursued the Armstrong story. And those guys, I mean, they were a minority, there were, you know, a few people at different times, but I always felt, you know, conveniently, I suppose, that there was a serious journalist. They were the guys who had a conscience, and they never, you know, refused to take the opportunity to come over and encourage me. And that meant a lot. You know, journalists you'd never met before. Some guy from Germany, some guy from Australia, some guy from Romania. Well done. You know, your Armstrong, your pursuit of Armstrong has been really good. And that was enough for me. You know, I was very self-motivated on it, and I had a lot of kind of inner drive. And
never a bit of I mean, we all have negative self-talk. I have, I'm sure you have in other areas of your life, but was there no self-talk that was negative, that was making you doubt yourself at all?
No, honestly, I mean, I know it sounds almost pompous, arrogant to say it, but in 1999, I was convinced Lance was cheating. Now, I took lots of steps from there to find out more. Every single step just deepened the conviction. So in no time, it was perfectly obvious he was cheating. Zero doubt. I mean, somebody comes to you and says, I was in a hospital room with Lance. I heard him tell his doctors about the performance-enhancing drugs he used. This was 1996. You know, 3 years before he would win his first tour, I heard him admit all the drugs he did. And then you get a guy, Stephen Swart, who says, I rode with Lance in that team, Motorola, before he got near winning the Tour de France. We decided as a team to go on a doping program. Lance was the strongest advocate of doping, even though he was one of the youngest in the team. So you're getting all this information. It's utterly clear that a great fraud is being perpetrated.
Indeed, indeed. So when, I mean, ultimately your motivation was for the truth, but was there any kind of motivation for the self? Perhaps you could see a vision of, you know, people applauding you in the streets or slapping you on the back. Was it anything?
No.
No. Or was it purely in the name of honesty and integrity?
No, it was kind of the opposite. I mean, I remember coming across a little quote from Marge Simpson. She once said, you know, there's no shame in being a pariah. And I used to kind of reassure myself with Marge's quotation. And I used to, there is no shame in being the pariah here, because maybe the pariah is right.
Can I ask you, obviously we looked at some of the traits that you have, which is focus, complete confidence in your story. But it still takes many people to say what you did. You probably estranged yourself from a number of peers. Probably, I don't know, did you have any physical threats against you?
No physical threats. One of Lance's teammates did tell me to be careful when I went to America. He says, you wouldn't know what could happen if you went there. Now, I didn't believe that Lance Armstrong would ever do anything bad. But I was warned by one of his teammates to just be careful when I was in the US.
Did that deter you in any way?
Not at all. Because I didn't believe Lance would do that. So I didn't really worry. And, you know, there are different kinds of people in life. If you break them into two categories, there are people who believe that the bad thing will always happen to them, and there are people who believe it will never happen to them. And I'm one of those. I'm the latter, yeah.
And that's another trait that we can obviously refer to and model ourselves on. Let me ask you though, David, through all that you've shown, and you are an icon in the journalistic world, and I would say certainly in the moral world. We live in a world today where very few people can live according to that honesty and integrity. What would you tell someone in life, in business, in any type of life, in terms of modeling your boldness, your tenacity, your courage in order to achieve in life? What can people learn from your experience?
I think what I would take from the Armstrong story is, if you think something isn't right, you have a duty to say that it isn't right. Don't go with the flow. You know, ask the awkward question and pursue it. Don't just sit there silently because everybody seems to think this is a great idea. And if you do the right thing and you ask that question, even though you might initially be very unpopular, people will notice what you've done, good people. And some of those people will have things to tell you, to say, look, you're on the right track. I can give you some help here. And that's been something I've seen all of my journalistic life.
So your message is to stay true to your gut and to your belief.
Yes, and you will find that there's more help and support out there than you would have than you will imagine at the beginning.
And where would you be without having extraordinary cojones?
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Where would Lance Armstrong be?
Yeah, well, Lance had for sure, because what he did was so incredibly audacious. I mean, to think about the neck that it took to present yourself as an icon to the cancer world, and to have that spotlight and to brazen it out. I mean, that was some
to be able
exploit.
To live that kind of lie.
Yeah.
I mean, is that cojones, or is that just, well, I don't know, living a lie? But it's certainly not something we're going to indulge in, because I don't think we're going to be inviting him on here.
Yes.
But this is a man of honourability, integrity, and something we should model. Now, before we go, I wanted to present you with something that is ultimately dessert, but it's under the chair. It's just like the crackerjack pencil, or the blankety-blank checkbook and pen. It is a pair of steel balls, which, well, some people use them for de-stressing, but something to remind you of the incredible cojones that you've shown in your career. And of course, course, the other thing is, can I open this for you? Because I hope it's the right size. This is indeed the special edition cojones t-shirt. There you go. Whether you'll wear it or not on next July's Tour de France, I don't know. But certainly, this is something that you have. This man is a legend, and I can honestly say it's an absolute pleasure. I could talk to this guy for the next 24 hours about sport, about him. Unfortunately, he's got to go. Thank you very much, David, for coming. You are definitely an icon that I will model. I'm sure you're going to be an icon and someone who many people out there are going to model. And let's hope that many people follow in your footsteps to honesty, integrity in this world. Thank you very much.
Thank you.